How's it going, everybody? This is the Lax Hacks podcast where we talk about just about anything that has to do with lacrosse. This is your host, Austin Blumbergs, and before we start on today's topic, I'm going to give you a little overview of who I am and what I have to do in the lacrosse world. I am a current sports studies major at St. Bonaventure University, all while also being a Division I lacrosse player. I grew up in the town of Pena, New York, where lacrosse is basically in our blood. Lacrosse has always been a big part of my life, so that's why I decided to start a podcast on it. So now that you know a little bit more about me, let's get into today's topic. So as the topic of Black Lives Matters has become a staple in modern media, I'd like to talk a little bit today about a group of people whose discrimination goes a little under the radar, and that would be the Native Americans. The Native Americans are not a group of people you see every day. They only reside in certain areas across the world, such as upstate New York and such as Canada. And one of the most unique things about this group of people is the fact that they themselves created the game of lacrosse. They refer to themselves as the Iroquois, or Six Nations, you can call them as well. And recently they went through a period of discrimination that nobody really expected. The World Games Organization has been working on getting lacrosse into the program for quite a few years now, and finally they decided to make it come true. However, with this, the organization decided that the Iroquois would not represent their own nation. Um, Previously to this, they have always been referred to as their own nation in lacrosse. They play against, the United States, Canada, every other country, and they're allowed to represent themselves as a group of people. The lacrosse community did not grow very fond of this. They did not think it was fair, and as outsiders, it might have seemed like it was a good idea, but the lacrosse community did not think so. Eventually, the World Games Organization came up with the idea that they didn't have enough space in order to make the Iroquois its own team. So Ireland willingly gave up their position in the World Games and gave it to the Iroquois as a sign of gratitude and thanks for giving us all the game of lacrosse. I thought this was a very big step in terms of fixing any bridges that were burned within the lacrosse community, coming together and fighting against something that they didn't think was right. But then this got me thinking about something that really had never crossed my mind before. It got me thinking about how the Iroquois are treated through their daily lives. I decided to do some research to figure out what the discrimination is like within the Native American community. Through research, I found that 23% of Native Americans feel that they are discriminated in clinical encounters. 38% feel they have experienced violence through discrimination at some point in their lives, while 34% also feel they have been threatened or harassed for being Native American. I then decided to talk to one of my best friends, Charlie Randall, on what it's like to be of Native American descent. All right, so our first interviewee is Charlie Randall. Charlie is a marketing major and a history minor. He is also part of the intramural volleyball team, while all being one of my best friends. So Charlie, I've gotten to know you quite well, and one of the things that I picked up on is that you've told me that you're part Native American.
That's correct.
And that you've played several sports in high school.
Also correct.
So the first thing that I'm going to ask you is, have you ever experienced any sort of discrimination outside of the sports world for being Native?
Outside of the sports world, for color of skin or looking different from others in a rural area, no, I have not. The only thing that's come up that's a little bit annoying or something that would not happen to someone else is when it becomes known that I have heritage. The question is, what percent? To just to make sure people want to see if it's legitimate, because Seeing 2% is considered illegitimate. In my case, it's like an eighth, but that's the only time that it's come up that has been kind of annoying to have to explain. But other than that, I've not experienced any racial discrimination.
Okay. So tell me again. Is it your dad or your mom that is Native American?
My father's side.
Your dad. Okay. So, do you know of any like discrimination on his side of things, or his side of the family, and anything that you've grown up around?
For our family, no, not so much. But I know of people in the area who have had a little bit of difficulty in some of the other schools. I mean, you got to keep in mind we're a very very rural, very white, and very conservative area. So anytime that you're a little bit different, especially among older generations, there's going to be a lot of questions that might be insensitive to answer for people at some times. Thankfully, I never had to deal with that, but I know of people who definitely.
Yeah, my area is very similar to yours, in that manner. Um, and then another question I have is just like, what is the, have you ever experienced any sort of discrimination in sports?
In sports, personally, no, I have not. And I think in high school sports, especially in these areas, there's not really too much of that. I think some of the trash talk and whatnot in sports comes from a lot of different areas than race, especially when a lot of people, like me included, it's a lot of it's a lot of white in this area. So I never experienced that against me as an athlete.
Um, yeah, no, I knew that you don't have lacrosse in the area. Which is nice to, get this perspective of someone else from like a different side of things, like seeing it at a different angle.
Right.
So, is there any discrimination that you really have seen, and does it and anything that really does bug you when it comes to like Native American discrimination?
Yeah. So, and this has become more apparent as attention gets drawn to the issue. So Washington Redskins are a prime example. It took until 2020 for them to have their team name dropped. Now, the term Redskin uh, is referred to the bounty of the scalped heads of Native Americans from back in the day. So it's a little bit of a racial slur. Also, you wouldn't have a team called the Blackskins. So the fact that it took till 2020 to change that is one thing. Another thing about Native American mascots, a lot of times headdresses are used or other symbols of Native American religion. So that's kind of under the umbrella of iconoclastic error. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of taking something that's sacred to one group of people and using it as a sporting event, as an icon, as a logo. And usually, I mean, if you're familiar with the old Cleveland Indians logo and the Chicago Blackhawks logo, they're portrayed in a very, very Native American fashion. So I don't have so much of a problem with them being used as mascots as long as it's in a respectful way. But using sacred things like a headdress or tribal drums, those are sacred things to a religion that you wouldn't see. You wouldn't see someone using a crucifix in that way for a Christian religion. You wouldn't see people using a prophet for the Muslim religion. You just wouldn't see that. So I think there's a lot of, not necessarily the race, but a lack of respect for the culture overall, and that's apparent through history.
Yeah, and I do agree that with the whole Black Lives Matters movement going on, and like everything coming forth, it's bringing attention to the issue, but at the same time, it's definitely covered up because the population between Native Americans and African Americans is so big and different. Like like it's you only see Native Americans in certain areas across the nation. So
very true, and unfortunately, that is by design.
Yeah, it is, and there will be people that go through their entire life without seeing somebody that's Native American and not even know that they exist. So
for sure,
I think that is an issue. So here's a little bit of another controversial little question that I have for you. Do you think the discrimination is two-sided? Like, do you think that like there's any sort of this is a little bit different and difficult of a question, but do you think it's a two-sided thing, two-way road?
Now, I think that with the Native Americans, it's a lot more cut and dry of a thing than with maybe African Americans. Native Americans, I have not seen too much Native American distaste for. Um, that's let me start that over. If we talk historically about the white versus Native American relation, you, you've got invasion of homeland, forced conversion to a religion that they don't naturally believe in. With the Spanish, not believing in that got you wrapped in straw and burned alive. And scenarios like Wounded Knee, um, moving westward with Manifest Destiny, bringing diseases, killing people off, and then having a government force you to live in areas that they tell you to live in that is one huge, tiny fraction of the land that you had to begin with. The discrimination is very one sided. And I think that now that Native Americans have platforms like social media to make noise, I think people are having a problem with that. But a quick version of discrimination that shows that people aren't, aware of Native. Some people, there's been polls that show some people don't even think Native Americans exist. They think they're like the Mayans and they're just gone, which is really troubling. But also, a Native American just got this. Conservative white people were demanding his birth certificate because they don't think he was born in America. Hard to get more American than a descendant of the first people to be on the country. Now to say that there's not Native Americans who have a very, very harsh disdain for people who have done them no wrong, and it might be just because they're a white person. That's another thing. But I don't think that in that small of a population can really surmount that they were there for thousands of years beforehand and then were forcibly kicked out and then forced to live in tight communities with very little resources, or if they do have resources, they're gained from rather shoddy ways. But yeah, so overall, to answer your question, I think that there's one-way discrimination, but I think that there's some misplaced disdain for white people on the Native American behalf that probably comes from frustration.
Yeah, and from the lacrosse side of things, like I have definitely witnessed some sort of anger and what's the word despair, I guess you
Yep.
could towards the white towards like people like me, for uh you know different reasons, and I'm not saying that those are reasons to be I'm not saying that those are bad reasons at all.
Right.
But do you have any? So the last question I'll ask you is: do you have any sort of advice that you think will bring both sides together more?
Um, I think it's really hard to reason with some Native Americans, especially older generations, and say, "Oh, look, no hard feelings. We're going to do better from here." But I think that is the way to do it. I think with younger generations now, especially, it's a lot more accepting of other cultures, and I think schools are getting better at teaching other cultures. So I think in time, I like the way that the trend is going, that people are able to understand each other's cultures, maybe understand the people that were here first and not honor Christopher Columbus as a hero so much. And I think that learning it not necessarily from each other, but getting people prepared to meet each other for when they finally do, whether they do or they don't, I think it's going to be a lot less. There's going to be a lot less friction between Native Americans and not just white Americans, but people in the country in general. Because yeah, so I think that my best advice would be that look beyond what you initially see on both sides and talk to the person, because at the end of the day, we're all people and we all have something to say, and the color of your skin definitely has a factor in who you are as a person, or your heritage, not necessarily just the color of your skin, but your heritage has a factor of who you are as a person. But that does not mean you get to judge a person entirely based on that. So I think that would be my advice.
I would agree. So, all right, Chuck. I know you. Thank you for showing your knowledge on.
Hey, no problem.
You're very knowledgeable. And I'm very glad that you took some time out of your day to sit down and talk to me about this.
Oh, no problem. I was happy to help you out. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. My talk with Charlie brought up a lot of key points that I thought were very interesting. He told it how it was, how the world is today, and talked about what needs to be fixed and how to fix it. Being of a minority can never be an easy thing, and there is a lot of hate in this world. There's a quote that I found while doing my research that I found was very interesting. It goes right with our topic very well. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." I think Charlie is a very big believer in what this is saying, and I could not agree anymore. There is a lot of darkness and a lot of hate that happens in our world. We have to strive to reach that light at the end of the tunnel using all the love that we have. That love is the only thing that is going to bring everybody together and eventually resolve all the issues that we have in society today. Again, I'd like to thank Charlie Randall for coming out and talking to us today about a subject that's a little touchy and might be a little sensitive, but the only way we're going to figure it out is if we talk about it. Thank you guys for joining me today. It was a pleasure, and I hope to see you next time.